Alright, what's going on everyone? In this video I'm going to show you how you can upgrade the Azorius Spirits Challenger deck into the top tier meta deck that it is designed after. With a few small changes, we can actually have the fully finished deck that can be frequently seen top 8ing major Pioneer tournaments. So the Azorius Spirits deck has most of the cards from the tier 1 deck. The big issue is the ratios or the number of copies of each card it plays. So let me just show you. On the left is the main board that you have out of the box, and on the right is an example of a tier 1 deck. This finished second place in a Pioneer challenge recently. So if I highlight the cards that the decks have in common in green, this is what it looks like, and if I highlight the cards that are different in red, this is what it looks like. You'll notice that the deck has many of the same cards, but the ratios are wrong. Like, it should have 4 Mausoleum Wanderers, you only have 2. It should have 4 Spell Quellers, you only have 2. It never has 4 Spectral Sailors, but you have 4 when it normally has like 2 or 3. So that's the issue. We just need to fix these ratios a little bit. Not too big of a deal. The big issue is the lack of collected company. Technically, the tier 1 Spirits deck is not Azorius, it's Bant, and it splashes green for 1 card. That is collected company. It's very expensive. It's about $70 USD for the playset, and that's not counting all the extra dual lands you need to make a 3-color deck actually playable. So for the sake of this guide, we're going to keep it blue-white, we're going to keep it Azorius, but I will leave a link to a Bant, Spirits metagame page. It's basically the same thing. It's just spend like $200 on the mana base for green duels and then spend $70 on collected company, and that's it. It's a very expensive mana base for 1 green card basically. So for now, blue-white. The first thing we need to do, we need to take out 2 Spell Pierce for 2 Mausoleum Wanderers. Spell Pierces aren't normally in this deck. They basically added these as a budget option for the Wanderers. They're like $5 each, $10 for a couple more of them, and they might be going down because of the printing in this deck, so they might be cheaper than that by the time you see this. But the Wanderers make sense, and it's obvious. They just took out 2 Wanderers, put Spell Pierce in its place, so swapping those back to the Wanderers makes a lot of sense. Then you can take out 2 Remorseful Clerics for 2 Spell Quellers. Most decks don't play the Cleric's main board, and I mean, a lot of them don't even play its sideboard, so getting those Spell Quellers in just makes a lot more sense. It's a really good card, one of the better spirits. It's played in modern spirits, just a great spirit, and the Cleric's fine, but not 100% necessary. And at this point, there are 2 cards that are worth adding, but which cards you take out and which cards you should add is really up to you. There's a little bit of versatility here because it changes from deck to deck, but it's common to see Skyclave Apparition, and we're starting to see Patrician Geist in these spirit decks. Now, Patrician Geist hasn't fully caught on yet, but I'm recording this right after Midnight Hunt came out, right? So it might be more common as the weeks go on. But the Apparition is excellent. It's an excellent removal spell. Almost every deck I saw played 2 copies. It's very common to see 2 copies. And the Geist is a new lord that pumps up spirits, and it's comparable to the Empyrean Eagle that you have now, right? The Empyrean Eagle basically pumps everything in the deck, but then it gets awkward with the Watcher, because the Watcher doesn't get pumped up by either of these, whereas with Empyrean Eagle it does, right? There's some, it's all weird, but the point is, Patrician Geist might be a replacement for Empyrean Eagle. It might vary from deck to deck. It's so hard to say right now because it hasn't really been tested enough, but regardless, spirit decks don't play Brazen Borrower. I can say that. They don't play Brazen Borrower, and they rarely ever play 4 copies of Spectral Sailor. And by rarely ever, I mean they never do. I couldn't find a single deck that played a full 4 copies of Spectral Sailor, just because it's great. You want it like every game, but you don't want like 2 or 3 copies. It doesn't really do much in multiples. And Brazen Borrower is amazing. It just doesn't necessarily synergize. It's not a spirit. So at the very least, you have 2 slots here, maybe 3 if you take out 2 Spectral Sailors, because some decks do play 2 Spectral Sailors instead of 3. But even if you just take out 2, you can take out 2. You can add 2 Skyclave Apparitions. That's very common for decks to play 2 Skyclave Apparition. They are expensive. They're like $7 each at the moment, but that's common, so definitely doable. But if you don't want to spend like the $15 or whatever on the Apparitions, 2 Patrician Geist totally makes sense as well. I think the card's great. Obviously, it's a Lord and a Tribal Spirit deck, so that's perfectly fine. Whichever you prefer is totally okay with me. And as for the mana base, naturally you can improve this with better dual lands. Replacing the temples with shocks is preferable, although expensive, and there are also pathways and whatnot as well. So dual lands, of course, always makes the mana base more consistent, although also makes it much more expensive. And the sideboard of this deck is a little bit of a mess, so I'm just going to show you what some of the top tier decks play. First off, Mystical Dispute, Archon of Emeria, and Rest in Peace are played in almost every deck in the metagame. I would say like 95% of them play these cards. Now granted, if you don't want to spend money on Rest in Peace, you have those two Remorseful Clerics that you can add to the sideboard, so that's fine. And as for the other two cards, Mystical Dispute, great against control decks, Archon, great at shutting down degenerate combo decks. It's also very common to see Skyclave Apparitions in the sideboard. Most decks will play like 2 main board and then 1 or 2 sideboard, along with Portable Hole and Settle the Wreckage. Again, this is just removal. Portable Hole, good against aggro decks. Settle the Wreckage, great against go wide aggro decks. Board Sweeper's always nice, so those are often played, and that's essentially it. This deck was the most difficult to upgrade, I think, simply because it was missing some more expensive cards. You know, Mausoleum Wanderers, Spell Quellers, Skyclave Apparitions, they're all a little pricey, which is unfortunate. This deck's hard to upgrade just because the cards that we need are like $5 to $10 each, which kind of sucks. But the good news is this deck is very solid out of the box. You basically have everything you need. You just need a couple more copies of this card and a couple more copies of that card. But overall, like, you have the deck minus the green splash, right? But either way, if you bought this card, you're playing at Friday Night Magic, it's pretty solid, so not bad. So there you go, guys. I hope this video was helpful. Check out the other guides if you're interested, and I will see you in the next one.